I never thought I'd find myself standing in my own driveway at 7 in the morning, staring at a line of minivans dropping off toddlers at my guest house while a woman who wasn't me collected cash payments at the door. But that's exactly where life had brought me on that Tuesday in September, and the woman orchestrating this entire unauthorized operation was none other than Patricia Hendricks, the president of our Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association in Naperville, Illinois. Let me back up a bit. My name is Gregory Walsh, and I'd bought my property on Willow Ridge Court about 18 months earlier. The house came with a detached guest house in the back, a cozy little structure that I'd been renting out for extra income. My last tenant had moved out in July, and I'd been taking my time finding a new one. The guest house had good bones, a kitchenette, a bathroom, and about 600 square feet of living space. Nothing fancy, but it was private and well maintained. Patricia had been on my case since the day I moved in. She was 52, always wore her blonde hair in the same tight bob, and had made it her personal mission to enforce every single HOA rule with the enthusiasm of a prison warden. She'd cited me for leaving my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours, for planting flowers that weren't on the approved color palette list, and for parking my work truck in my own driveway because it had a small company logo on the side. The irony of what I was witnessing that morning wasn't lost on me. I'd come home early from a job site because I'd forgotten an important set of blueprints. I ran a small contracting business, and this particular project required specific plans that I'd left in my home office. As I pulled onto my street, I noticed the unusual amount of traffic. 3 minivans were lined up near my driveway, and I could see small children being walked up the path that led to my guest house. I parked on the street and got out, my confusion quickly turning to anger as I realized what was happening. Patricia stood at the guest house door wearing a bright yellow apron with cartoon animals on it, greeting parents and taking envelopes that I assumed contained payment. A handmade sign hung next to the door that read Little Learners Academy in cheerful bubble letters.
"What the hell is going on here?"
I called out, striding across my lawn. Patricia's head snapped toward me, and for a split second, I saw panic flash across her face before she composed herself into her usual expression of haughty superiority. "Gregory, you're home early. This is my property, Patricia. I can come home whenever I want. What are you doing with my guest house?" A woman holding the hand of a small boy looked between us nervously. Patricia gave her a tight smile. "Just give me one moment, Jennifer. Why don't you take Aiden inside? Snacks are already set up." After Jennifer and her son disappeared through the door, Patricia turned to me with her arms crossed. "I'm providing a valuable service to our community on my property, without my permission?" I could feel my blood pressure rising. "How long has this been going on?" 3 weeks, she said, as if that made it somehow acceptable. "I'm running a small daycare service for neighborhood families. Many of our residents are dual-income households who struggle to find quality childcare options." "That's great, Patricia. But you're doing it in a building I own. You don't live here. You don't rent from me. You have absolutely no right to be using my guest house for anything, let alone running a business out of it." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please, you weren't using it. It's been sitting empty for 2 months. I saw an opportunity to put the space to good use while helping families in need. I don't care if it's been empty for 2 years. It's my property." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police." "Don't be dramatic," Patricia said, but I heard the edge of worry in her voice now. "Look, I'll explain everything. After your last tenant moved out, I happened to notice the guest house was vacant. Several neighbors had been asking me if I knew of any childcare options in the area. I remembered that clause in our HOA bylaws about community benefit initiatives. There's no clause that lets you break into someone's property and start a business." "I didn't break in," she said quickly. "I have a key." That stopped me cold. "Excuse me?" "From your property inspection last year, when we did the HOA compliance check for exterior maintenance standards, remember? You gave me a key so I could inspect your guest house exterior and the side yard access." I did remember that. I'd been out of town for work, and Patricia had insisted she needed to verify that my fence met HOA specifications. Like an idiot, I'd given her my spare key and trusted that she'd use it for its intended purpose and then return it. She'd never given it back, and I'd honestly forgotten about it. "That was for a one-time inspection over a year ago," I said. "You were supposed to return that key. Using it to access my property without permission is illegal. That's breaking and entering, Patricia. I prefer to think of it as making efficient use of unused community resources. That's not a thing. That's not how property rights work." I was genuinely amazed at her audacity. "How many kids do you have in there right now?" 7, she admitted. "Well, 8 once Marcus arrives. His mother is running late this morning." "Jesus Christ." I ran my hand through my hair. "Do you have a license for this? Are you registered with the state?" Her silence was answer enough. "You're running an unlicensed daycare," I said slowly. "With 8 kids. On property you don't own. Using a key you were supposed to return over a year ago." The regulations for home-based daycares are unnecessarily restrictive, Patricia said. I did my research. The state requires all sorts of inspections and certifications and paperwork. It's bureaucratic nonsense. I've raised 3 children of my own. I'm perfectly capable of supervising a small group of kids for a few hours each day. That's not your decision to make, and it's definitely not your decision to make on my property. I started dialing. You need to shut this down right now and get those kids out of my guest house. Where do you expect their parents to go? Patricia demanded. Do you know how hard it is to find affordable childcare in this area? These families depend on me. And might I remind you, Gregory, that I am the HOA president. I have a certain amount of authority when it comes to community matters. You have authority over HOA common areas and enforcing neighborhood rules. You don't have authority to commandeer private property for your personal business ventures. I finished dialing 911, then hesitated. Actually, wait. Patricia looked triumphant, as if she thought she'd gotten through to me. I'm not calling the police first, I said. I'm calling county licensing, then I'm calling the police. Her face went pale. Gregory, please be reasonable about this. I am being reasonable. I'm handling this through the proper legal channels instead of physically throwing you off my property, which I have every right to do. I lowered my phone for a moment. Get those children out of there safely. Call their parents. Tell them whatever you want. But I want my guest house empty in 30 minutes. I have a contract with these families, Patricia protested. They've paid for a full month of care. Then you'd better figure out refunds because this operation is done. 30 minutes, Patricia. I walked away from her and headed toward my main house, already searching on my phone for the DuPage County Licensing Office. My hands were shaking with anger. The sheer entitlement of thinking she could just use someone else's property for her own business was stunning, even for Patricia. Inside my house, I found the county licensing number and made the call. The woman who answered was professional and patient as I explained the situation. So to be clear, she said, this individual is operating what she's calling a daycare facility with 8 children present, and you have no knowledge of any licensing or permits. That's correct. And she's doing it on my property without my permission or knowledge. I only found out this morning. Can you give me the address? I provided my address and specified the guest house location. The woman made some notes, and I could hear her typing. I'm showing no license or registered childcare facilities at that address, she confirmed. Operating an unlicensed daycare is a serious violation. We'll have an inspector out there within the hour. Thank you. I've asked her to close it down, but I'm not sure she'll actually comply. An inspector will ensure compliance, the woman assured me. If children are currently present, that makes this a priority response. We take child safety very seriously. After I hung up, I looked out my kitchen window. I could see Patricia on her phone, pacing back and forth in front of the guest house. Parents were starting to arrive again, looking confused. I watched Patricia speak to them, gesturing animatedly. Several of them looked toward my main house with expressions I couldn't quite read. I decided to call my lawyer, Martin Jeffries. I'd used him when I bought the property, and he'd helped me review the HOA documents before I signed. He answered on the 3rd ring. Gregory, good to hear from you. What's going on? I explained the entire situation from the unreturned key to the unlicensed daycare discovery. Martin listened without interrupting, though I heard him exhale sharply a few times. Okay, he said when I finished. First of all, she's committed several violations here. Unauthorized use of your property, potentially trespassing, and depending on how you want to pursue it, possibly theft of services since she's been using your utilities. I want her prosecuted for everything possible. I understand you're angry, and you have every right to be. Let's take this step by step. You've already contacted county licensing, which is good. They'll handle the unlicensed daycare issue. For the property violation, we should file a police report for unauthorized use of your property and possibly criminal trespass. She claims it's not trespassing because she has a key that was provided for a specific limited purpose over a year ago. That doesn't grant her ongoing access rights. The fact that she didn't return the key when required and has been using it without your knowledge or consent actually strengthens the trespassing case. Good. Has she caused any damage to the guest house? I hadn't even thought to check. I don't know. I haven't been inside yet. You should document everything. Take photos and videos before anyone else enters. If the county inspector goes in first, that's fine, but make sure you get your own documentation as soon as possible. Any modifications she's made, any wear and tear, everything, will do. I'll draft a cease and desist letter and have it sent to her today. We'll also send a notice demanding return of your key and compensation for unauthorized use of your property. If she's been charging families for this daycare service, she's been profiting from illegal use of your property. That thought made me even angrier. How much do you think I can get? That depends on a lot of factors. What she charged, how long this has been going on, any damages to your property, Lost rental income since you couldn't rent the space while she was using it. We're potentially looking at several $1,000s at minimum. After I hung up with Martin, I grabbed my keys and headed back outside. The scene had evolved. Now there were several parents clustered near the guest house, and Patricia was in the middle of them, speaking urgently. I caught bits and pieces as I approached. Completely unreasonable, empty space, community benefit. One of the mothers, a woman I recognized from neighborhood gatherings but whose name I couldn't remember, turned to me as I walked up. "Mr. Walsh, I'm sorry, but is it true you're shutting down Patricia's daycare?" "I'm shutting down the illegal operation happening on my property without my permission, yes. But where are our kids supposed to go?" another parent asked. "I have to be at work in an hour." "I sympathize with your situation, but that's not my problem," I said. "Patricia decided to run a business on property she doesn't own, without proper licensing and without the owner's knowledge. That's on her, not on me." "This is so typical," Patricia jumped in. "This is exactly the kind of selfish attitude that's destroying our community. Here I am, trying to help families, trying to provide an affordable service, and Gregory is more concerned about his precious property rights than about the well-being of children." "Don't you dare try to make me the villain here," I shot back. "You committed multiple crimes. You used my property without permission, you're running an unlicensed facility, and you're putting children at risk by operating outside regulatory oversight." "At risk?" Patricia's voice went shrill. "I would never put children at risk. How dare you suggest such a thing?" "Licensing exists for a reason, Patricia. Health inspections, safety inspections, background checks, proper adult-to-child ratios, emergency procedures. You've bypassed all of that. What if there was a fire? What if a child got seriously hurt? Do you have liability insurance, an emergency action plan, first aid certification?" Her face flushed red, which told me everything I needed to know. "That's what I thought," I said. "You're operating on your amateur assumptions about childcare, with no oversight, no insurance, and on someone else's property. And you have the nerve to act like I'm the one in the wrong here." A silver sedan pulled up, and a woman in a DuPage County shirt got out, carrying a clipboard and a camera. She was in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd dealt with situations like this before. "I'm looking for Patricia Hendricks," she announced. Patricia's confident posture deflated slightly. "That's me. I'm Linda Chen, inspector with DuPage County Licensing Division. I'm here regarding a report of an unlicensed child care facility operating at this address." "Now wait just a minute," Patricia began, but Linda held up her hand. "Are you currently providing care for children in that structure?" Linda pointed to the guest house. "I'm providing a community service. Yes or no, madam? Are there children inside that building right now under your supervision?" Patricia hesitated, then said, "Yes. But how many children?" "7, Linda made a note. "And do you have a license from DuPage County to operate a childcare facility?" "The licensing requirements are excessive for such a small operation." "That's a no," Linda said, writing more notes. "Are you the property owner?" "No. But does the property owner know you're operating this facility here?" Patricia glanced at me. "Well, he does now. And does he consent to this use of his property?" "Absolutely not," I said firmly. Linda turned to me. "Are you Gregory Walsh, the property owner?" "Yes, madam." "And you have no knowledge or agreement regarding the use of your property as a childcare facility?" "None whatsoever. I discovered this operation about 40 minutes ago when I came home early from work. She's been using a key that was supposed to be returned over a year ago from an HOA inspection." Linda's expression hardened as she turned back to Patricia. "Madam, I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. You are operating an unlicensed childcare facility, which is a violation of Illinois state law. You are doing so on property without the owner's consent, which creates additional legal complications. And you currently have 7 children in your care in an uninspected, unapproved facility. Those children are perfectly safe," Patricia insisted. "That's not for you to determine. Operating a daycare without a license is illegal specifically because there's no way to verify safety standards are being met. No fire safety inspection, no health department clearance, no background checks, no verification of proper adult-to-child ratios, no emergency procedures in place." "I have emergency procedures," Patricia said defensively. "Are they written down? Have they been reviewed by the fire marshal? Do you have evacuation routes posted? Do you have working fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, first aid supplies? Emergency contact information for every child?" Patricia's silence spoke volumes. "Shut this operation down effective immediately," Linda said. "You need to contact the parents of every child in your care right now and have them picked up within the next hour. You will cease all childcare operations at this location and any other location unless and until you apply for and receive proper licensing." "This is ridiculous," Patricia sputtered. "I'm trying to help people." "Then help them legally," Linda said sharply. "Madam, do you understand that you could face significant fines for this?" Operating an unlicensed daycare in Illinois can result in penalties of up to $500 per day per violation, and each unlicensed child in care can count as a separate violation. I watched Patricia do the math in her head. 7 kids, 3 weeks, $500 per child per day. The numbers were staggering. You're also potentially liable for any injury or harm that comes to any child in your care, Linda continued. Without licensing and without insurance, you're personally and fully liable. If a child had been hurt in your care, you could have faced criminal charges in addition to civil liability. Nothing happened, Patricia said weakly. You got lucky, Linda replied. Now I need to inspect that facility to assess what violations exist. Mr. Walsh, as the property owner, do I have your permission to enter and document the conditions? Absolutely. I'd like to come with you if that's okay. I want to see what she's done to my guest house. That's fine, Ms. Hendricks. I need you to bring all the children outside safely and have them remain under supervision out here while I inspect. Parents have been contacted? I'm calling them now, one of the mothers said, already on her phone. Patricia, looking defeated, went into the guest house. A few minutes later, she emerged with 7 children ranging from what looked like 2 years old to maybe 5. They seemed happy enough, thankfully, and had no idea about the chaos surrounding them. The other parents who were still there helped keep the kids occupied on the lawn. Linda and I entered the guest house, and I felt a fresh wave of anger as I looked around. Patricia had completely transformed the space. The furniture I'd left for tenants had been pushed against the walls or removed entirely. In their place were small tables and chairs clearly meant for children, colorful storage bins full of toys, and educational posters covering the walls. She'd hung curtains I hadn't approved, put down foam floor mats, and installed a small bookshelf stuffed with children's books. Did you authorize any of these modifications? Linda asked, taking photos. None of it. The last time I was in here was early July when my previous tenant moved out. It looked nothing like this. Linda photographed everything methodically. She checked the smoke detectors, finding that one had a dead battery. She looked for fire extinguishers and found none. She examined the electrical outlets and noted that only some had child safety covers. She opened the small refrigerator in the kitchenette and found juice boxes, string cheese, and other snacks. Has this refrigerator been inspected by the health department? Linda asked Patricia, who had followed us inside. It's just snacks, Patricia said. I'm not running a restaurant. If you're providing food to children in a childcare setting, health department regulations apply. You need proper food handling certification, and the facility needs to pass inspection. Linda made more notes. The bathroom? I led her to the small bathroom. Linda documented that there were step stools for children, and that the cabinet under the sink had a child safety lock. But she also noted the lack of proper hand-washing instructions posted and the absence of paper towel dispensers, which were required in licensed facilities. How many adults were supervising 7 children? Linda asked. Just me, Patricia admitted. Sometimes my daughter helps when she's not working, but usually just me. Illinois requires 1 adult for every 8 children in a licensed home daycare, Linda said. While you're technically under that ratio, the regulation also requires that the caregiver be licensed and certified. You have none of those qualifications documented or verified. We spent another 20 minutes in the guest house while Linda documented everything. By the time we emerged, most of the parents had arrived to pick up their children. They looked stressed and unhappy, shooting angry looks in my direction as they collected their kids. I understood their frustration about losing childcare, but I wasn't going to feel guilty. Patricia had created this situation, not me. Once all the children were gone, Linda turned to Patricia with her clipboard. Mrs. Hendricks, I'm issuing you a cease and desist order for operating an unlicensed childcare facility. You are prohibited from providing childcare services for compensation until you apply for and receive proper licensing. You will receive formal notification of violations and potential fines in the mail within 7 to 10 business days. Do you understand? Yes, Patricia said quietly. Mr. Walsh, do you want me to document this for a police report as well, given the property use issue? Yes, please. I've already spoken with my attorney, and will be pursuing this through both criminal and civil channels. Linda nodded and made additional notes. I'll include in my report that the facility was operating on property without owner consent. That information will be available for your legal proceedings. After Linda left, I turned to Patricia. I want you off my property right now. I want my key returned immediately. And you will be hearing from my lawyer. Gregory, please, Patricia said. And for the first time, she actually looked scared rather than indignant. Can't we work something out? I'll stop the daycare. I'll pay you rent for the time I use the space. This doesn't have to become a big legal thing. You made it a big legal thing when you decided to steal use of my property for 3 weeks, I said. You made it a big legal thing when you ran an illegal business that put children at risk. You've spent the last 18 months making my life miserable with your petty HOA violations, and now you want mercy because you got caught breaking actual laws. I made a mistake, she said. A serious mistake. I see that now. Give me my key. She reached into her purse and pulled out a key ring, removing one key and handing it to me. I recognized it as my spare. Is this the only copy you made? She hesitated just a moment too long. Patricia, did you make copies of my key? One copy, she admitted. It's at my house. Go get it, right now. I'll wait here, Gregory. Right now, Patricia, or I'm calling the police immediately and reporting stolen keys and trespassing. She left, walking quickly toward her car. She lived 4 streets over, so I knew she'd be back in less than 10 minutes. I used the time to walk through the guest house again, this time taking my own photos and video. I documented every change, every modification, everything she'd done without my permission. I also noticed things I hadn't caught during Linda's inspection. Small scuff marks on the walls, a juice stain on the carpet, a broken hinge on one of the kitchen cabinet doors. Each discovery fueled my determination to pursue this to the fullest extent possible. Patricia returned with another key and handed it to me without a word. I examined it, confirmed it looked like my key, and pocketed it. I'll be changing all the locks anyway, I told her. If I find out you kept any other copies, I'll add that to the charges. Now get out. She left, and I watched until her car disappeared down the street. Then I pulled out my phone and called the Naperville Police non-emergency number. I need to file a report for unauthorized use of my property and possible trespassing, I told the dispatcher. An officer arrived about 30 minutes later. His name was Officer Raymond Parker, and he was thorough in taking my statement. I showed him the guest house, explained about the key that was never returned, and showed him the photos documenting the unlicensed daycare operation. So she's been using your property without permission for 3 weeks? Officer Parker confirmed. At least 3 weeks for the daycare. But who knows how long she's actually had access. I haven't been in the guest house regularly since July. She could have been coming and going for months. Officer Parker made notes. And you have documentation from the county inspector? Yes, and I can get you her contact information. My lawyer is also drafting a cease and desist letter and will be filing a civil suit. This is pretty cut and dry, Officer Parker said. Occluded use of property, possibly criminal trespass depending on how the state's attorney wants to pursue it. The daycare violations are handled by county licensing, but the property issues are criminal. I'll file this report and it'll be forwarded to the state's attorney's office. They'll decide whether to press charges. What are the chances of actual prosecution? Hard to say. It depends on their caseload and priorities. But you have good documentation, a clear pattern of behavior, and aggravating factors like the business operation. I'd say chances are decent, especially if your lawyer pushes for it. After Officer Parker left, I finally sat down on my front porch steps and let myself process everything that had happened. It was barely noon, and the day felt like it had been going on forever. I was exhausted, angry, and honestly a little shocked at the whole situation. My phone rang. It was Martin, my lawyer. I heard back from your property management company, he said. I wanted to confirm if you use property management for the guest house? No, I manage it myself. Why? Patricia apparently told some of the daycare parents that she had permission from your property management company. Just wanted to verify that was false, completely false. I don't have a property management company. She's lying to cover herself, thought so. I'm adding that to the documentation. Gregory, I want you to know this is probably going to get messy. Patricia is HOA president, which means she likely has allies in the neighborhood. You might face some social pushback. I don't care. She broke the law. Multiple laws. I agree, and I think you're doing the right thing. Just be prepared for it to get uncomfortable. Martin wasn't wrong. Over the next few days, I started noticing changes in how neighbors treated me. Some people were supportive, telling me that Patricia had gone too far and that they couldn't believe she'd do something so brazen. But others were clearly on Patricia's side, either because they'd used her daycare service or because they were friends with her. I got a nasty note left on my door, unsigned, calling me heartless for destroying working mothers' childcare arrangements. Someone left a pile of baby toys on my front lawn with a sign that said, "Babies matter more than property." My work truck was egged one night, which I reported to the police but couldn't prove who'd done it. The HOA sent me a formal notice that I had violated Section 3.7 of the bylaws by having excessive commercial traffic to my property during the daycare operation. The irony was stunning, considering Patricia had been the one creating that traffic, but I guess they were trying to find any angle to make me look like the bad guy. Martin sent them a response letter that basically amounted to, "You're insane if you think that violation applies here." But in more professional legal language, things escalated a week after the initial shutdown. I received a notice that there would be an emergency HOA meeting to discuss my harassment of Patricia and to vote on whether to fine me for various alleged violations. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. "This is retaliation," Martin told me when I called him. "Classic retaliation for reporting illegal activity. Document everything, and I'll attend the meeting with you." Thursday evening arrived, and I drove to the clubhouse with Martin. The parking lot was fuller than I'd ever seen it for an HOA meeting. Apparently, people were invested in this drama. Inside, the clubhouse meeting room was packed. Patricia sat at the front table with 2 other board members, looking composed and professional. When Martin and I walked in, the room got quiet, and I felt dozens of eyes on me. Patricia called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We have serious matters to discuss regarding violations of our community standards and the well-being of our neighborhood." "This should be good," Martin muttered next to me. "As many of you know," Patricia continued, "I recently started a small childcare service to help working families in our community. I used a vacant property with space that was sitting empty and unused. Unfortunately, one of our residents took issue with this community benefit and shut down the operation, leaving numerous families without childcare and creating significant hardship." Several people in the room nodded sympathetically. Martin raised his hand. "Point of order. I'm Martin Jeffries. Representing Mr. Walsh. For the record, Ms. Hendricks operated an illegal unlicensed daycare on my client's property without his permission, knowledge, or consent. She used a key that was provided for a one-time inspection and never returned. County licensing shut down the operation due to numerous safety violations and lack of proper licensing. This is not a case of someone taking issue with a community benefit. This is a case of illegal activity being properly reported to authorities." The room erupted in competing voices. Some people started arguing with Martin, others defended me, and Patricia banged a gavel trying to restore order. "Mr. Jeffries, you are not a member of this HOA and do not have speaking rights at this meeting," Patricia said sharply. "Actually, as legal counsel for a member, I have the right to speak on matters pertaining to my client according to your own bylaws, Section 8.3, Martin replied calmly. "I've reviewed your governing documents thoroughly." Patricia's jaw tightened. "Regardless, this meeting is to address Mr. Walsh's violations, not to relitigate the childcare matter." "What violations?" I asked loudly. "The ones where your illegal operation created traffic to my property? That's not my violation, that's yours. You have repeatedly demonstrated hostility toward community initiatives," Patricia said. "You have refused to participate in neighborhood events. You have been uncooperative with HOA inspections. And now you have prioritized your property rights over the needs of families with children." "Property rights are actual legal rights," I said. "Your personal opinion about community initiatives doesn't override the law." Another board member, a man named Robert Chen, spoke up. "Perhaps we can find a compromise here. Gregory, would you be willing to rent your guest house to Patricia specifically for the daycare use? That would resolve the permission issue, and she could work on getting proper licensing." "Absolutely not," I said. "I don't want an unlicensed daycare on my property at all, and even if she gets licensed, I don't want to rent to her. She's proven herself untrustworthy." "See?" Patricia said to the room. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Completely unwilling to work with the community. I'm unwilling to let someone who stole use of my property for 3 weeks and ran an illegal business rent from me," I corrected. "That's not unreasonable. That's common sense." Martin leaned forward. "Let's be very clear about what happened here. Ms. Hendricks committed criminal trespass by using property without authorization. She operated an illegal business that put children at risk. She made unauthorized modifications to Mr. Walsh's property. And now this board is attempting to punish him for reporting illegal activity. That's textbook retaliation, and it opens this HOA up to significant legal liability." "We're not retaliating," Patricia insisted. "We're addressing legitimate violations." "What violations specifically?" Martin asked. "I'd like you to cite the exact bylaw sections Mr. Walsh allegedly violated." Patricia shuffled through papers. "Section 3.7, excessive commercial traffic created by your illegal business, not by my client. Section 5.2, failure to maintain harmonious community relations." Martin actually laughed. "That's not an enforceable violation. It's an aspirational statement in your community guidelines, not a regulation." "Try again." "Section 2.9, modifications to property without architectural review committee approval." "What modifications?" I asked. "You allowed your guest house to be used for commercial purposes, which requires committee approval." "I didn't allow anything," I said. "It was done without my knowledge or consent. You can't violate a rule by being the victim of someone else's illegal activity." The third board member, a woman named Susan Whitmore, looked uncomfortable. "Patricia, maybe we should table this discussion. It does seem like we're on shaky ground here." "We are not on shaky ground," Patricia snapped. "We have the authority to enforce community standards. You have authority granted by the bylaws, which must be exercised in good faith and within legal bounds," Martin said. "Retaliatory enforcement is illegal. If this board votes to fine or sanction Mr. Walsh for reporting criminal activity, he will file suit against the HOA, and you will lose. More importantly, if this continues to be framed as a conflict between Mr. Walsh and the community, rather than what it actually is, which is Ms. Hendricks breaking the law, we'll have no choice but to pursue this more aggressively. Are you threatening this board? Patricia demanded. I'm informing you of the legal realities, Martin replied. My client has been patient so far, but that patience has limits. He has grounds to file criminal charges for trespassing, to sue for damages from unauthorized property use, to report theft of services for utility usage, and potentially to pursue fraud charges for the lies Ms. Hendricks told to daycare parents about having permission. Right now, he's allowing the legal process to unfold through appropriate channels. But if this board continues to harass him and create a hostile environment, we'll have to consider all available remedies. The room was silent now. Even Patricia seemed to realize that Martin wasn't bluffing. Susan spoke up again. I move that we table this discussion pending further legal review of the situation. Second, Robert said immediately. We don't need to table anything, Patricia protested. All in favor of tabling? Susan asked. Robert raised his hand and Susan raised hers. Patricia glared at them both. Motion passes. This matter is tabled. Susan looked relieved. Patricia tried to move forward with other business, but the energy had gone out of the meeting. People started leaving, and within 15 minutes the room was half empty. As Martin and I left, Susan caught up with us in the parking lot. Mr. Walsh, I want to apologize, she said quietly. I didn't know the full extent of what Patricia had done until tonight. I knew about the daycare, but I thought you had agreed to it. When I found out she'd been using your property without permission, I was horrified. Thank you for speaking up in there, I said. I should have done it sooner. Patricia can be very convincing, and she framed this whole thing as you being unreasonable about helping the community. But what she did was wrong, clearly wrong. I'll be voting to remove her as board president at the next regular meeting. I appreciate that. Over the next 2 weeks, things developed quickly on multiple fronts. The state's attorney's office decided to press charges against Patricia for criminal trespass and unauthorized use of property. It wasn't a felony, but it was a misdemeanor that carried potential fines and even possible jail time. Martin filed a civil suit on my behalf seeking damages for the 3 weeks of unauthorized use, compensation for the modifications to my property, lost rental income, and attorney's fees. He calculated damages at just over $12,000, which seemed fair given the circumstances. The county licensing division sent Patricia a formal notice of violations and fines totaling $3,500 for operating without a license. She had 30 days to pay or appeal. The parents who'd used her daycare were understandably upset about losing their childcare arrangement, but several of them also started asking questions about what exactly Patricia had been doing. When they found out she'd been operating illegally on someone else's property without safety inspections or proper licensing, a few of them actually apologized to me. One mother, Jennifer, the ones I'd seen that first morning, came to my house with her son Aiden. Mr. Walsh, I owe you an apology, she said. When Patricia first told us what happened, she made it sound like you were being cruel and arbitrary. But I've since learned the truth about what she was doing, and I'm actually grateful you shut it down. The more I think about it, the more I realize how dangerous it could have been. No safety inspections, no insurance, no proper licensing. If something had happened to Aiden, she trailed off, looking shaken. I'm glad nothing did happen, I said sincerely. I have nothing against you or the other parents. You were misled by Patricia. I just feel so stupid for not asking more questions. She made it sound so professional and legitimate. She's good at that, I said. Presentation over substance. The criminal case moved through the system faster than I expected. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she'd had implied permission to use the guest house because it was vacant, but the prosecutor demolished that argument. Implied permission doesn't exist in property law, and the fact that she'd never returned the key and had operated in secret for 3 weeks clearly showed she knew she didn't have permission. Patricia ended up pleading guilty to a reduced charge in exchange for avoiding jail time. She was sentenced to 200 hours of community service, ordered to pay restitution to me in the amount of $4,000, and placed on probation for 1 year. The civil suit took longer. Patricia tried to fight it, arguing that she'd actually improved my property with her modifications and that I should be grateful. Her lawyer actually made that argument in mediation, and even the mediator looked skeptical. Your client installed modifications without permission, operated a business without authorization, and lied to customers about having consent, Martin pointed out. Arguing that the property owner should be grateful is absurd. We eventually settled for $10,000, which Patricia agreed to pay in monthly installments over 2 years. I would have preferred a lump sum, but her lawyer convinced the judge she couldn't afford it. and I decided that getting paid over time was better than trying to collect on a judgment she might not pay at all. The HOA situation resolved itself in an unexpected way. 2 weeks after the disastrous meeting, I received a notice that Susan and Robert had called for a special election to remove Patricia as president due to conduct unbecoming of an HOA officer. The vote was scheduled for early November. I attended the meeting. Though I didn't speak, I didn't need to. Multiple neighbors stood up and talked about how Patricia's behavior had embarrassed the community, created legal liability for the HOA, and demonstrated poor judgment. The vote was 37-12 in favor of removal. Patricia actually tried to give a speech defending herself, but it fell flat. She claimed she'd been trying to help the community and that she was being punished for caring too much. But by that point, too many people knew the truth about what she'd actually done. Susan was elected as the new president, and one of her first acts was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the HOA for the attempted retaliation. She also announced that the board would be reviewing all HOA rules and enforcement procedures to prevent this kind of abuse of authority in the future. I ran into Patricia one more time after all of this. It was mid-December at the grocery store. We ended up in the same checkout lane, and I could see her debating whether to switch lanes to avoid me. In the end, she stayed, probably because all the other lanes were longer. "Gregory," she said stiffly. "Patricia." We stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then she spoke again, her voice low. "I want you to know I really was trying to help those families." "I believe you," I said, surprising both of us. "I believe your intentions were good. But intentions don't excuse breaking the law or using someone else's property without permission. I know that now. I've had a lot of time to think about it. Did you ever consider just asking me if you could rent the guest house?" She looked down. "I thought you'd say no." "You're probably right, I would've, but that was my choice to make, not yours to override, I know." She was quiet for another moment. "I lost my position as HOA president." "Did you hear? I was at the meeting." "Of course you were." She didn't sound angry, just tired. "I've been on that board for 8 years. It was important to me." "Maybe you can work your way back," I said, "after you finish your probation and pay your restitution." She looked surprised that I was being even slightly sympathetic. "Maybe. Or maybe it's time for something different." Her turn came to check out, and she moved forward with her cart. Before she left, she turned back to me. "I am sorry, Gregory, for what it's worth." "It's worth something," I said. After she left, I thought about the whole situation. Patricia had been genuinely trying to help in her own misguided way, but she'd gone about it in the worst possible manner. She'd let her position as HOA president convince her that she had more authority than she actually did, and she'd paid a heavy price for it. The guest house sat empty through the winter. I cleaned out all of Patricia's modifications, repaired the damage, and repainted. In February, I found a new tenant, a graduate student at North Central College who needed a quiet place to live while finishing her thesis. She was respectful, quiet, and always paid rent on time. It was exactly what I'd been looking for originally. The HOA under Susan's leadership was dramatically different. She enforced rules fairly and reasonably, focused on actual violations rather than petty complaints, and treated homeowners with respect. For the first time since I'd moved to Meadowbrook Hills, I actually felt like the HOA was serving the community rather than ruling over it. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia had started volunteering at a licensed daycare center as part of her community service hours. Apparently, she was good with the kids, and the center director had offered her a part-time paid position once her community service was complete. Maybe she'd found a legitimate way to help families after all. The daycare parents eventually found other arrangements. Jennifer ended up joining a nanny share program with 2 other families in the neighborhood, which worked out better for everyone involved. A few families found spots at licensed facilities nearby. It was an adjustment for everyone, but they managed. As for me, I learned to be more careful about who I gave keys to and to check on my property more regularly. I also learned that standing up for your rights can be uncomfortable and can create social tension, but sometimes it's necessary. Patricia had counted on me backing down to avoid conflict, and when I didn't, her whole scheme collapsed. By spring, life had mostly returned to normal. I was working on a large commercial project in Aurora. My tenant was settled in the guest house, and the HOA was functional without being oppressive. Patricia kept a low profile, and we nodded politely when we saw each other but didn't engage beyond that. Martin told me the payments from Patricia were coming through as scheduled, which was good. He'd been concerned she might default, but apparently she was taking the judgment seriously. One Saturday morning in April, I was working in my front yard when Susan walked over from across the street. "Hey, Gregory, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "I wanted to give you a heads up that Patricia has moved out. She sold her house, and the new owners are moving in next week." "Really, where's she going?" "I heard she bought a condo in Glen Ellen. Smaller place, but she said she wanted a fresh start." "Can't blame her for that." "No, I suppose not. Susan paused. You know, in a weird way, that whole situation was probably good for the HOA. It forced us to look at how we were operating and make some changes. We've updated our bylaws, created better oversight for board members, and established clearer procedures. The whole community is better for it. Silver lining, I guess. More than that, I think. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show you where the problems are. She smiled. Anyway, I wanted you to know. The new neighbors seem nice, by the way. Young couple with a dog. No plans to run a secret daycare in anyone's guest house. I laughed. That's good to hear. As Susan walked back to her house, I thought about everything that had happened over the past 8 months. It had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. But I'd stood up for myself, protected my property rights, and held someone accountable for breaking the law. The fact that the person breaking the law had been the HOA president just made it more important that consequences followed. The neighborhood had learned an important lesson about the limits of HOA authority and the importance of operating within the law. Patricia had learned that good intentions don't excuse illegal behavior. And I'd learned that sometimes doing the right thing means weathering a storm of social disapproval before people understand the full picture. I finished my yard work and went inside, satisfied that justice had been served, my property was secure, and life in Meadowbrook Hills had returned to a much healthier normal. The guest house sat peacefully in my backyard, generating legitimate rental income from a legitimate tenant who'd signed a legitimate lease. No surprises, no drama, no unauthorized daycares. Sometimes the boring legal way of doing things really is the best way. Patricia had learned that lesson the hard way, and I was content to have been the one who taught it to her. My property, my rights, my rules. That's how it should be, and that's how it would stay going forward. Looking back on everything, I realized that the whole experience had actually made me appreciate property ownership more. When you own something, you have both rights and responsibilities. Patricia had tried to take advantage of my property without accepting any of the responsibilities that come with it. She wanted the benefits of having a space for her daycare without the burden of actually owning or legally renting that space. The criminal justice system, the civil court system, and even the HOA's internal governance had all ultimately worked the way they were supposed to. It took time, and it was frustrating at points, but the right outcome was reached. Patricia faced consequences for her actions. I was compensated for the misuse of my property, and the community learned valuable lessons about governance and accountability. The financial settlement I received helped offset the legal costs and the time I'd spent dealing with the whole mess. The restitution from the criminal case covered the utilities Patricia had used without permission. The civil settlement covered everything else. It wasn't about profit, it was about making me whole after someone had wronged me. I'd also gained something unexpected from the experience. Respect from my neighbors who now understood that I wasn't just being difficult for the sake of it. I was protecting my rights and holding someone accountable for breaking the law. Several neighbors had approached me privately to say they were glad I'd stood my ground, even if they hadn't felt comfortable saying so publicly during the height of the conflict. The new HOA leadership under Susan was night and day compared to Patricia's regime. Rules were still enforced, but with common sense and proportionality. If your trash cans were visible for an extra day because you forgot to bring them in, you got a friendly reminder, not a fine. If you wanted to make exterior modifications to your property, the Architectural Review Committee actually worked with you to find solutions rather than just rejecting proposals. The whole experience reinforced something I'd always believed. Organizations are only as good as the people who run them. An HOA can be a beneficial community organization that maintains property values and creates a pleasant neighborhood environment, or it can be a nightmare of petty tyranny and overreach. The difference comes down to the character and judgment of the people in charge. Patricia had let the small amount of power that came with being HOA president go to her head. She'd started to see herself as some kind of community leader with special privileges and authority. In reality, she was just a volunteer board member of a private organization with limited powers defined by a set of bylaws. She wasn't the mayor, she wasn't a judge, and she definitely wasn't entitled to use other people's property for her own purposes. The fact that she'd genuinely believed she was helping the community made it somewhat understandable, but no less wrong. Plenty of terrible things have been done by people who thought they had good intentions. The law exists to protect people's rights, even from those who claim to be acting for the greater good. As spring turned to summer, I found myself reflecting on how much my life had changed since that morning when I'd come home early to find a line of minivans at my house. It felt like years ago, even though it had only been about 9 months. The stress of dealing with Patricia's illegal daycare, the legal proceedings, the HOA conflict, and the social tension in the neighborhood had taken its toll. But I'd come through it stronger and more confident in standing up for myself. I'd learned that having good legal representation was crucial, That documentation was everything, and that persistence paid off. I'd also learned to trust my instincts when something seemed wrong, even if other people were telling me I was overreacting. The guest house continued to serve its purpose, providing rental income and housing for my tenant. The space that Patricia had temporarily hijacked for her unlicensed daycare was back to being what it was meant to be, a legitimate rental property operating within all applicable laws and regulations. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I hadn't come home early that day. How long would Patricia have continued running her illegal operation? Would she have eventually gotten caught through some other means, or would she have gotten away with it indefinitely? Would a child have been hurt in an emergency because the facility wasn't properly equipped or inspected? Those were unanswerable questions, but they reinforced that I'd done the right thing by shutting her down immediately. The safety issues alone justified the action, even setting aside the property rights violation. Linda Chen, the county inspector, had found numerous safety deficiencies during her inspection. Any one of them could have resulted in a child being injured or worse. Patricia's criminal record would stay with her. The misdemeanor conviction would show up on background checks, which would make it difficult or impossible for her to ever work in childcare again, even in a licensed facility. That seemed harsh in some ways, but it was also a necessary consequence. Someone who'd operated an illegal daycare and shown such poor judgment probably shouldn't be working with children in any capacity that required trust and responsibility. The community gradually moved on from the drama. New families moved in, and for them, the story of Patricia's illegal daycare was just an interesting bit of neighborhood history, if they heard about it at all. Life continued, as it always does. I kept making my monthly payments on my mortgage, my tenant kept paying rent, and the HOA kept sending out newsletters about upcoming events and reminders about community rules. It was all remarkably normal and boring, which was exactly what I wanted. The legal settlement payments from Patricia arrived like clockwork each month, $417 automatically deposited into my account. It would continue for 2 years, and then that chapter would be completely closed. Martin had structured the settlement carefully to ensure she couldn't default without serious consequences, including potential jail time for the original criminal charges if she violated the terms of her probation. As summer progressed, I started seeing Patricia around town occasionally. She'd been living in Glen Ellen for a few months by then, but she still shopped in Naperville sometimes. We never spoke beyond a polite nod if we made eye contact. There was nothing left to say. I heard through the grapevine that she'd taken the part-time position at the licensed daycare center where she'd been doing her community service. Apparently, she was good at it and enjoyed the work. I was glad she'd found a legitimate outlet for her interest in working with children. Maybe she'd learned her lesson after all. The neighborhood itself had improved since Susan took over as HOA president. She'd organized several well-attended community events, including a summer block party that actually felt fun rather than mandatory. People were more relaxed, more friendly, and less worried about getting cited for minor violations. The Architectural Review Committee had approved several projects that Patricia's board would have rejected, including a really nice pergola that the Johnson family built in their backyard. It added value to their property and looked great, and there was no reason to deny it other than bureaucratic power tripping. Property values in Meadowbrook Hills had actually increased over the past year, which the real estate agents attributed to the improved HOA governance and the general desirability of the Naperville area. It turned out that when people felt comfortable in their neighborhood and didn't fear their HOA, they were more likely to invest in their properties and recommend the area to friends. By the time fall rolled around again, marking a full year since the initial incident, I felt like I'd finally processed everything that had happened. The anger had faded, replaced by a sense of satisfaction that justice had been served and that I'd protected my rights and property. I'd learned valuable lessons about property management, about standing up to authority figures who overreach, and about the importance of community governance that respects individual rights. These were lessons I'd carry with me for the rest of my life. The guest house tenant's lease was up for renewal, and she'd decided to stay another year. She loved the quiet space and the privacy, and I appreciated having a reliable tenant who respected the property and paid on time. It was a good arrangement for both of us. As I sat on my front porch one October evening, watching the sun set over the neighborhood, I thought about how different things could have been. If I'd been more confrontational, if I'd been less patient with the legal process, if I'd retaliated against Patricia in the heat of the moment, any of those choices could have made things worse. Instead, I'd followed the proper channels, trusted the legal system, and let justice take its course. It hadn't been quick and it hadn't been easy, but it had been right. Patricia had faced consequences, I'd been made whole, and the community had improved as a result. The lights were coming on in houses up and down the street. Families were settling in for the evening, kids were doing homework, dinners were being cooked. It was peaceful and normal, and everything a neighborhood should be. My phone buzzed with a text from Martin. Final settlement payment cleared. Your account with Patricia Hendricks is now closed. Congratulations on seeing this through. I smiled and texted back. Thanks for everything. Couldn't have done it without you. And that was it. 2 years of monthly payments complete, all legal obligations fulfilled, all loose ends tied up. The Patricia situation was officially and completely finished. I went inside and poured myself a drink, toasting to property rights, to justice, and to boring, peaceful suburban life. The guest house sat quietly in my backyard, exactly where it should be, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. No unlicensed daycares, no HOA presidents abusing their authority, no legal drama. Just a rental property generating legitimate income for its owner, who'd fought to protect what was rightfully his. Sometimes the good guys actually win. It just takes patience, persistence, and a good lawyer. I'd had all three, and it had made all the difference. The end.